The Gospel reading from Luke chapter 24, verses 1 to 12. On the first day of the week, at early dawn, the women who had come with Jesus from Galilee came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, and when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you when he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all of this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in. He saw the linen cloths by themselves, and he went home amazed at what had happened. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
In Luke's gospel, the resurrection happens in 12 verses. In Mark's gospel, even shorter. And you would think with all the hubbub about Easter, we would have gotten a few more details, maybe explained it better. I mean, we get 3 whole chapters to the lead up of him being born in Luke, a whole chapter to Mary visiting her cousin, whole chapters to parables we struggle to understand, and the guy is raised from the dead in a mere 12 verses to describe perhaps what is the most consequential event in human history. It's all a matter of perspective, I suppose. You know, when I was stationed in Germany, one of my favorite things to do was ride the train. This was not something I got to do being raised around here in Ohio, and I loved every opportunity to just hop on the train and off we would go to any number of wonderful places throughout Europe. On one occasion, I boarded the train with my backpack and sat opposite another gentleman wearing a business suit. And I specifically remember having my Stars and Stripes newspaper, a cup of coffee, and a packet of cookies. And I want you to picture this scene. It's very important you get this clear in your mind. Here's the table, the newspaper, cup of coffee, packet of cookies. There's a guy sitting opposite of me, perfectly ordinary looking guy, wearing a business suit, carrying a briefcase, one of those nice leather ones, modern cut suit, and I thought he's much cooler than me, and I quickly decided that no small talk should be made since I did my normal antisocial thing and opened my paper. Now, as I said, this guy was perfectly normal looking. It didn't look like he was going to do anything weird. But what he did was this. He suddenly leaned across, picked up the packet of cookies, tore it open, took one out, and ate it. Now this, I have to say, is the sort of thing my Midwestern values, the Midwest culture of nice as I call it, are very bad at dealing with it. I was new to Germany, and maybe it was a cultural thing. For the record, there's nothing in my background or upbringing or education that teaches you how to deal with someone who in broad daylight has just stolen your cookies. Mr. Rogers didn't cover this one. Thanks a lot, Fred. See, but in the end, I did what any self-respecting Midwesterner would do. I ignored it. And I stared at my newspaper, took a sip of coffee, and tried to read, but I couldn't focus. And I thought, what am I going to do? This man just ate my cookies. So I thought, I'll just have to go for it. And I tried very hard not to notice that the fact that the packet was already mysteriously open. I took out a cookie for myself, gave it a good loud crunch so that he could hear it, and I thought, well, that'll settle it. And what do you know, it hadn't, because right after that, he reached in and did it again. He took another cookie. Having not mentioned it the first time, I was way past the point of no return. I mean, I couldn't just chime in now. Excuse me, I couldn't help but notice. I mean, it doesn't really work at this point. Half the bag was already gone at this point, so we went through the whole packet like this. When I say the whole packet, I mean there were only about 8 cookies, but it felt like a lifetime. He took one, I took one. He took one, I took one. Finally, when we got to the end, he stood up, walked away, never said a word. We exchanged meaningful looks, and then he walked away, and I breathed a sigh of relief and sat back and started to think about where I could get another packet of cookies. I'd, after all, been shorted. A moment or two later, the train was coming to my stop, so I tossed back the rest of my coffee, stood up, put on my coat to head outside, and went to get my keys out of my pocket and pulled out of my pocket my packet of cookies. The thing I like about this story is that there's a guy in Germany wandering around for the last 8 years who's had the same exact story, only he doesn't have the punchline. It's a matter of perspective, I suppose, on why our gospel writer is seemingly so concise on facts about this seminal event in history. Luke covers so many events in the account of Jesus' life with painstaking detail, almost as if he was a historian. He even writes at the beginning, "Since many have undertaken to set down an orderly account of the events that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who were from the beginning, who were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, I too decided, after investigating everything carefully, from the very first, to write an orderly account for you." He's a bit long-winded, actually, compared to his counterparts, including details at every turn of the story in Jesus' life. In the 15th year of the reign of Emperor Tiberius, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, and Herod was a ruler of Galilee, and his brother Philip, ruler of the region of Iturea, and Trachonitis, and Lysanus, ruler of Abilene. During the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. He could have just said, the word of God came to John in the wilderness, but he doesn't. You know folks like this? You just want a simple answer. Where did you guys go to eat? Well, the thing was, the water wasn't working right in the shower, and my dog's vet appointment was different than usual, so long story short, we went to Red Robin. However, when we get to the resurrection, but on the first day of the week at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside him. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. And the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living amongst the dead? He is not here, but he is risen. Remember how he told you while he was in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Painstaking detail given to multiple times throughout Luke's gospel, Jesus urges his disciples to be kind to Samaritans, those seen as outsiders. But when it comes to overcoming death, they didn't find the body, they remembered what he said, and they went and told the others. That sure doesn't give us a whole lot to go on. How is anyone going to believe this? Scant proof to be offered for such a far-fetched claim. Especially today, when more and more people are skeptical of religion, Christianity especially, and for some good reason. The world today seemingly has no need for such a story, with no shred of physical evidence to support it. It seems to be frivolity, perhaps even a careless hope, with war waging in the streets of Ukraine. And we face the increasing challenges of poverty here in our own city of Canton. Resurrection? Who's got the time? It seems a luxury to focus on such things when the search for truth and the truth we seek needs to be so tangible. We just need the war to stop. We just need safe and stable housing for our community's children. We just need to make one more paycheck to make rent this month, or at least last month, so I'm not evicted. You see, finding truth amidst the billion differing perspectives in the world is not an easy task. We are constantly bombarded with advertisements, various news sources, social media threads, memes, photos, and status updates with claims to truth that shape our perspective of the world that we all share. Finding what is true can be a dangerous game when it seems that even what was widely held to be true by the larger society seems to be even more in flux, leaving the best among us to throw up our hands in pursuit of truth, giving all hope over to finding anything resembling truth. In a book titled The Christ of the Indian Road, E. Stanley Jones, one of the most celebrated and successful missionaries of our time, penned these words about the Christian claim to truth in Jesus Christ. In the middle of his missionary work in India, he says, I have therefore taken my faith and have put it out before the non-Christian world for these 17 years and have said, there it is, my brothers and sisters, break it if you can. And the more they have smitten on it, the more it is shown Christ came out of the storms and will weather them. The only way to kill Christianity is to take out the life and protect it. The way to make it shine and show its genius is to put it down in life and let it speak directly to life itself. Jesus is his own witness. Jesus does not need to be protected. He needs to be presented. He protects himself. For he did not come to bring a way of life. He came to be life itself. And if we go deep enough into life, we would find ourselves facing Jesus, who is life eternal. You know, I do think the relatively short nature of Luke's resurrection account is a matter of perspective. And that Luke, and hopefully to us, the central question of Easter is not what happened to Jesus way back then, but rather, where is Jesus now for us? In order to connect with the risenness of Jesus, with the risenness of all of us and all creation, there are two fundamental themes. Easter is now, and resurrection has consequences. Consequence number one. Even in death, love always has the last word. Or put another way by a pastor friend of mine, the worst thing is never the last thing. And I know that's easier said than understood, particularly for a soldier sent to the front or for a victim of a massive heart attack. Death can arrive quickly, like a thief stealing everything they value most. For those with chronic illnesses such as cancer or Parkinson's disease, the reality of mortality is more like a ride on a river, running through a series of higher and more dangerous waterfalls. Eventually, the current gets too strong and the rocks too sharp for a rider to survive. And I know now that almost anything I could say about the topic of death is overshadowed by the intrusive reality of Russia's attack on Ukraine. Fighting proceeds street by street. Ukrainian civilians have been killed by the most lethal methods of modern warfare. This is what happens when great power lacks conscience and lacks soul. I think of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Kindling of hope has been an essential element of his leadership. He has shown an infectious commitment to both national identity and to universal human dignity. And it's one thing, again, to say that resurrection has consequences for our lives. It's a whole nother thing when you're lying there in the hospital room, waiting for another set of chest scans or one more visit from a specialist, that thinking about the resurrection can be the farthest thing from your mind. And folks like President Zelensky can seem so unrelatable to us. But when I survey my most self-interested life, even in the darkest moments of either my combat tour or other personal tragedy, I have one source of confidence. And I don't need all 12 verses Luke so generously provides, just a few. Remember how he told you while he was in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again. Then they remembered these words, and returning from the tomb, all to this and all to the 11 had told the 11 and the rest. And in remembering this confidence, this truth, when I survey even my own self-interested life, I know that trying to improve our community's health here in Canton is worth every hour and every minute that I've ever devoted to it and will devote to it. While there are many of us, many of you can attest, I push as hard as anyone to advocate for the development of new, safe, and affordable housing for families, arguing that our most vulnerable residents are worth our attention and investment, that none of the hundreds of children in our school district should be housing insecure, and everything we do together as a church has been a part of a sacred mission, the mission of defending human dignity, because resurrection has consequences. And when it is said that it can't or shouldn't be done, I just have to remember how he told me while he was still in Galilee. And I am raised once again to the eternal truth that even in death, love always has the last word. If this sounds prideful, I remind you that this is exactly the cause that all of us are called to serve. All of us called to be raised to greater love, to provide emergency relief within Ukraine, and to help millions of migrant families find food and shelter. There are excellent nonprofit organizations internationally like UMCOR and here in Canton meeting these needs and advocating for sufficient government help. Easter isn't something we remember. It's something we live and breathe. Resurrection has consequences. The resurrection is more than an idea we talk about or believe propositionally. It's something we become, something we prove in the living of our stories. Rowan Williams describes it this way: the believer's life is a testimony to the risenness of Jesus. He or she demonstrates that Jesus is not dead by living a life in which Jesus is the never-failing source of affirmation, challenge, enrichment, and enlargement, a pattern, a dance, intelligible as a pattern only when its pivot and heart become manifest. The believer shows Jesus as the center of his or her life. Resurrection has consequence. Number 2, resurrections for all people. In Orthodox depictions of resurrections, Jesus is never by himself. He is always depicted taking the dead by the hand and pulling them out of their own tombs. And in him, we are all raised to greater love. Christ came to save us from our least selves. That's the gift and the challenge. So I apologize if you came this morning hoping for me to provide some evidence, some defense of the resurrection within the 12 verses Luke provides us, but much like Jesus in the tomb, you won't find it here. Instead, what I offer you is a challenge to those looking for evidence and a new perspective. Become that evidence. Be it. Live it. Living proof that the resurrection has consequences, and the third and final consequence is that that consequence is you. Let your life add on to the 12 verses Luke so graciously provides to tell one continuous story of love in God's making, and may the whole world one day see and know of a church and of a Christian in which we have been shocked into joy, brought to its knees in wonder, and been raised to greater love. Happy Easter, friends.